Morning from South Bend. I'm Kevin Brennan with the Notre Dame Alumni Association. Thanks so much for watching another edition of Catching Up With. Our guest today is a former star running back at Notre Dame. He's a national champion, Super Bowl champion, and a decorated Vietnam veteran, Rocky Bleier. Thanks so much for being here.
Kevin, you're welcome. Nice to be on. Thank you.
Rocky, we want to talk about all your success on the football field, as well as your service to the country in Vietnam. But at first we want to kind of back up to the beginning. So where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Appleton, Wisconsin, and grew up a Green Bay fan at that time. So I grew up in a bar, and it was a neighborhood shot in a beer joint that mom and dad had started in 1945. I came around just a year later. But anyway, that's so we grew up in that atmosphere, but it was a wonderful upbringing. It was a wonderful experiences, and coming out of the Midwest was a part of who I am today.
And how did you get the name Rocky?
Well, in that bar, obviously, when the patrons would come in after work, doing their shift work, and I was the firstborn of the family, and Dad, they'd say to my dad, "Hey Bob, how's that new baby of yours?" Well, being a very proud father, he said, "Oh, you should see him. He's got all these little muscles. He looks just like a little rock sitting in that crib." Well, they would come back the next day and they'd go, "Hey Bob, how's that little rock of yours?" And he'd go, "What do you mean? Your kid." And that's how I got it, and I had it ever since.
So you were a star athlete in high school there in Appleton. How did you end up choosing to attend Notre Dame?
Well, we had a great, we had a very successful athletic program at Xavier High School, brand new Catholic high school that we got to be a part of and set a tradition for. And we had a wonderful coach by the name of Torchy Clark, who really got the most out of his players, both on the basketball court as well as the football court. We never lost a football game in high school, and
wow.
in that conference. So it was a brand new conference, and it was all exciting for us. And because of that success and recognition, you got recognition from colleges. And so one of the colleges, obviously, was Notre Dame. University of Wisconsin was another college. But the recruiter from Notre Dame as an assistant coach who had that area really probably gave me the best piece of advice. And he said, you're going to get a lot of scholarship offers, and every place you go, people will roll out the red carpet. So by the time you go to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different schools and you have to make that choice, it'll be very difficult to make the right choice. He said, my suggestion to you is choose 3 schools that you want to go to, that you would like to graduate from, because football is not a guarantee, and you may get injured along the way. And so I thought that made complete sense to me. It really did. It wasn't as if I wanted to go to any other Big Ten school. I thought I owed an obligation to University of Wisconsin. And then we had a family friend that had gone to Boston College, hated Boston College. So I went out there and visited. But my first one was Notre Dame, and I met Era for the first time, and really and liked the campus and liked the program. And University of Wisconsin was too big for me. Boston College. I like Boston, not necessarily Boston College. I like Boston, but like all good Catholic boys, as you well know, is that, you come home and when you have to make the decision and you go to church, and that's what you're taught, and to pray for guidance and direction, which I did. And then I did what my mother wanted me to do, and that's go to Notre Dame. I think that's the majority of us how we ended up at Notre Dame, what my mother wanted us to do. And so it was a wonderful, actually, you look back and, it was a terrific decision on my part to be able to go there, because I fit so well into that school. I mean, it was like I went to a Christian Brothers high school, so I went to high school with no girls, figured I could go to college with no women. So, and we'll survive there.
Well, all Notre Dame fans are lucky that you followed your mother's wishes, because you had a wonderful career here as a football star at Notre Dame. You were, a key member of the '66 national championship team and a captain in 1967. When you look back on your time as a student athlete at Notre Dame, what's your fondest memory?
Well, I mean, I guess my fondest memory is that whole time that you spend there. I think the older you become, like us, and the more you get to reflect on changes in your lives and impact within your life, well, those 4 years really help solidify a substance of who you are. But from an athletic point of view, the success that I had at Notre Dame wasn't because of me or what I did. It was really because of Coach Parsegian and his staff and the talent that he had that surrounds you. And I've always come to learn is that one person doesn't make the team. It's really all those individuals. And if the group or the team is a success, well, then you get recognized, hopefully, for your contribution to the success of that team. And that's basically happened in my case. I mean, we had some, and you especially talk about 1966 and the first year or the first time that Era won his first national championship. I mean, it was a very talented team with All-Americans galore on that team. But we had the baby bombers, Terry Hanratty, who I understand had been on your program, before. Terry Hanratty, Jim Seymour. We had Nick Eddy, a perennial All-American, Larry Conger. We had Alan Page, Jimmy Lynch, and I could go on and on and on. And so it's those kinds of guys or caliber of talent that brings out the best of you. And so you look at that, and whatever success it was because of that whole. And you're right. And so in '66 we play Michigan State in the national, well, what ends up to be what will be our national championship year. But but to some of your listeners out there who are younger alumni, I mean, it ended in a tie as it goes down in the history of Notre Dame football. And you go, a tie? Yes, a tie. Well, what do you mean a tie? Was it overtime or sudden death? No, it was a tie. When the game was over, it was over at that time. And so you lived with it. But in some respects, it was the tie that prolonged the effect of the game, or the mystique of the game that had been talked about over these many years as being a key factor. Now, just to put a little things straight, is that was Michigan State's last game. Fortunately, we had one more game, our arch rival, Southern Cal, out in California. So the following week, we went out there, again on national television, and beat them 51-0. And that clinched it just like that for all the sports writers of who the number one team was at that time.
Well, a pretty convincing win there. So you graduated in 1968, and you were drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers. But during your rookie year, you were selected in a different kind of draft for the Army. How big of a surprise was that to you at the time that it happened?
Well, yeah, obviously it was a big surprise. Because at that time, and so let's just go back in a period of time, was that there was a draft and everybody was eligible for the draft. The only way you were not eligible if you were a student or if you had a physical ailment and were classified 4F, or you were in the National Guard or the reserve unit. And those units, unlike today, were not called up, and they were to protect the home guard. Anyway, everybody else was a target to be able to serve our country. And, I just kind of fell through the cracks at the time. And I figured that if you made a football team, that they would get you into a reserve unit. But 1968 was the height of the war. Everything was full. All the smart people, that didn't include me, already had been in a National Guard or reserve unit and at that time. But, we had time, or at least I understood. And all of a sudden I get my draft notice to report and to be inducted into the armed services. and I got it on a Wednesday to report the next morning at 7 a.m. to do so. And so all of a sudden, your world is turned upside down, and I ended up in Vietnam.
Wow. And then on August 20th, 1969, when you're serving in Vietnam, your life changed dramatically that day. Where were you and what were you doing?
We were on, we were in an area called Hep Duc. It was about 40 clicks outside of Chu Lai and an I Corps of Vietnam. And our mission was to go back and retrieve bodies that we had left 2 days previously. A sister company had been in the field and had been hit. We were airlifted to get them out of their hotspot. And when we finally reached them late at night, and in so doing, we ran across the machine gun position, and we're in a quick firefight. And the word was to leave the bodies, we'll come back for them. And that's what we were doing 2 days later. And it was about 8 o'clock in the morning. We're trying to find our location. And we're in a little wooded area walking onto an open rice paddy. And as we did, our point man all of a sudden saw enemy activity walking across the hillside, and he opened fire and pulled everybody out into the middle of that rice paddy. And the machine gun started to level the area. And guys were diving left and right into the rice paddy for some protection. Now, I carried an M79 grenade launcher, and my responsibility was to get firepower on that position. And I tried to the best I possibly could. And as I rolled on my side to breach the grenade, I got hit for the first time that day through my left leg. And so we're then in a firefight until those guys that were pinned down got out. And then the medic and I crawled back to our commanding officer. About 20 minutes later, the rest of the guys came crawling in, and they had gotten close enough to our perimeter to get a hand grenade inside the perimeter, and it hit my commanding officer on the back, and it bounded towards where I was, and I was right next to him. And by the time I could get up to jump out of the way, it blew up, and I was ultimately standing on top of it and blew up to my right foot, knee, and thigh. Again, we're another firefight until a platoon fought its way down to be able to get us out late at night, and then we were airlifted out of there to an aid station. Then I went to Da Nang, and then I spent 3 weeks in Tokyo, and came back to the States, where I spent 9 months in the hospital and went through 3 more operations.
And so what did the doctors tell you after you suffer these two, really serious injuries to each leg? What were you told, about your future and about your, future, what you had planned to do professionally, play football?
Well, they weren't going to tell me anything until I asked, obviously. And so that driving force, I did. I mean, I wanted to know, what extent of my damages were. Could I come back and play? Because I really wanted just to come back and play. I mean, I liked playing sports. I liked playing football. I liked playing in the National Football League. Whatever recognition or stroking my ego it was at that time, but that was my focus. And so when I asked the doctor, and he basically said, "Oh, don't worry about it. You're going to have a normal life, okay? Don't expect to get back in the gridiron because of the damage has been done to your foot, to your nerves, and to some of the bone structure. You just won't have the strength or the flexibility to be able to play it." And so it was like, wow. I mean, he just kind of like sucked that hope out, at the time. But there's always turning points, in one's life. And shortly thereafter, in part of this story, is that I get a postcard in the mail. It's got 2 lines on it. It said, "Rock, team's not doing well. We need you. Art Rooney, owner of the Steelers." Well, they didn't need me. But being the family that they were, they gave me an opportunity when I got out of the service to come back and play, or at least maybe to soothe their conscience that they gave me a chance. And I went to training camp that first year, maybe a little too soon, but it took its toll. Ultimately, they put me on injured reserve that year, and I came back the following year, and they put me on the taxi squad, or the developmental squad. So it really took me 2 years to mend, and I had another operation, and to be able to heal and come back and play.
As you mentioned earlier, I had the pleasure of interviewing your pal, Terry Hanratty, a teammate of yours at Notre Dame and with the Steelers last year for Catching Up With. And he said that he remembers when you were rehabbing from those injuries, working out alongside you, and he saw the pain you were in, and your limp, and he remembers saying to you, Rocky, why don't you go to law school, do something else? Why are you putting yourself through this? What was it that drove you to work so hard to get back onto the field?
I think the thing is that was my focal point, or quote, my identity at that time was playing football, and I liked playing football. I liked playing professional football, or at least what it gave me, fed my ego, whatever that was. And I tell people, I said, that became my focus point. And they said, well, like Terry said, why don't you go be a lawyer? Well, I didn't want to become a lawyer. Or why don't you do this? Well, I didn't. Why don't you coach? Well, I didn't want to coach. I mean, I wanted to play. And so I think, part of it was I wanted to erase all those wouldas and couldas and shouldas, as we have in our lives. If I would have done this, if I would have done that, I might have been this, or whatever it might be. If it didn't work out, at least I didn't look back and say I should have, or I didn't. I tried and it didn't work out. And you could live with those things. So that became very focused. And it took it. And I said, as I said, that first year I came back was really too soon. And I limped through most of that practice to get there. And one of the stories was that Terry and I were roommates because of our experience at Notre Dame playing together, and we were roommates when I came back. And he was so kind. He would rub my feet. He would massage my feet after practice because they were so sore, and I was limping and so on. But we don't tell a lot of people that. Because
well, it took you early on when your return with the Steelers. You were kind of a role player at the beginning, but eventually, as you got fully back to health as best you could, you really became a standout player and a hugely important member of that dynasty Steelers team in the 70s. You even rushed for 1,000 yards in 1976. You were an important part of 4 Super Bowl championship teams. How special was it for you to find that success on the field after everything you'd gone through to get to that point?
Well, I think no matter what we do, I think that's important in our lives. If you put the time and effort in, and hopefully you can get the results or have the success. But I really base a lot of the reason I got a chance to play on my experience at Notre Dame and what I was taught, and from Coach Parsegian and Tom Pagna, who was our backfield coach. And I can remember this, and is that Tom Pagna said anybody can run with a football. If you give a 2-year-old a football, he'll run around the kitchen. With anybody can run with a football. But to be a complete back, you have to learn how to block, to catch the football, know your assignments, and understand what needs to get accomplished. And so everything that was ever taught us there was a reason for it. There was a technique on how to do that. And wanting to achieve and wanting to be better, I listened to everything they said, and I was a very coachable guy at that time. And so when it came later on with the Steelers, and the reason I got a chance to break into the lineup wasn't because of size or speed, but of technique. One of the weaknesses that the Steelers had, or at least perceived by Chuck Noll, was that there was a weakness in the backfield, and that weakness was a blocking back. We had a fullback-oriented offense. Franco Harris was a perennial 1,000-yard rusher, but it was the responsibility of the halfback to be able to block for them. And so when the question was asked, who was your best blocker, the response was Bleier, and then Chuck Noll said, we'll start him and give him that opportunity. And so I guess that's all we ever ask, is that opportunity. And so you make the most of it, and it fits, is that my role, I didn't want to be Franco Harris, and Franco surely didn't want to be me. And so it fit well within the system of what needed to be done. And I filled a void in the spot, which allowed me to break into that starting lineup and ultimately walk away with 4 Super Bowl rings.
Well, you had a long and obviously very successful career in the NFL, and you've had a long and successful career after football as a speaker and in your business endeavors, but you've also devoted a lot of your time to serving as kind of an advocate for those serving in the armed forces and for veterans. What is it that motivates you to devote your time to those causes?
Well, I think it's something that we learn within our lives. I learned back in Appleton, I learned through Xavier, but more importantly, reinforced at Notre Dame, was the ability to give back when you're capable of doing it. Being in the position of a leadership role, whether you're captain of a team or you're a student, and what you represent is that you give back within your community. In my case specifically, and being a Vietnam veteran, that Vietnam veteran did not get recognized for his service. He did not get recognized for his contribution to this country. He was tied into a very controversial war, and thus he wore the mantle as a Vietnam veteran, and was not accepted in society. He would come back, repressed, go back to school, become part of a community, but had not like today, where everybody thanks a veteran for what they did. So to some degree early, because I came to a high profile sport and we were successful, you get recognized. And now all of a sudden, as a Vietnam veteran, there was an identity. And I thought, well, if I can use that identity to at least be a part of a movement, to bring recognition, to do whatever is necessary, to be able to get things done, well, then that's my responsibility. And so that's what got me involved. And and even today, there's still issues about veterans that are taking place. And even with our young people today, coming back and their care in the VA and that responsibility, and the concussions and brain injuries that they have to deal with. And so there's a lot of issues out there that I'm just involved in.
Well, Rocky, unfortunately, we're running out of time here. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for your service to the country.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me on the show, Kevin. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thanks to all of you who've watched today's program. And remember to watch all of our episodes of Catching Up With and all of our other online learning series programs. You can visit us at my.nd.edu/learn. I'm Kevin Brennan with the Notre Dame Alumni Association. Thanks so much for watching, and go Irish.